November 17th, 1939. Riddle me this, Mr. Chamberlain. Riddle me this, Monsieur Daladier. What is it that flies through the skies, dives through the sea, lives in the mud, and needles you mercilessly? Well, whatever it isn't yours. It's all mine. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Adolf Hitler survived an assassination attempt, and also some of his officers abandoned their plans for a coup. And after more than a month, negotiations between the Soviet Union and Finland, over Finland conceding territory, are going nowhere. The two nations are, however, not at war with each other, though that may soon change. The Finnish lingered in the Russian capital until November 13th, and then returned home. They were met by an atmosphere of unrealistic optimism and a conviction that as long as negotiations were going on, matters between the two countries could be straightened out. People who had left Helsinki as a precautionary measure began to drift back. Foreign Minister Elias Erkko was certain the Russians would back down in the face of Finnish stubbornness and world opinion. Many people in high positions both at home and abroad expressed strong opinions about Russia's peaceful intent. Meanwhile, in Karelia, General Meretskov was watching his time schedule very carefully. Soon, he would receive the message he had been waiting for. Meretskov was Soviet General Kirill Meretskov, commander of the Leningrad Military District. Joseph Stalin depends on information fed to him by several agencies, right? Thing is, after the great purges in the USSR in recent years, I talked about a few weeks ago, people kind of wanted to tell him what they thought he wanted to hear, like that the Finnish army could not offer any real resistance if the Soviets were to attack, and that the Finnish workers would rise up against their current government as soon as the Red Army crossed the border. I read in William Trotter's The Winter War that a news agency TASS report on the 8th even said the families of Finland's now mobilized reserves were so poor they didn't even have shoes or winter clothing. TASS is by now suggesting the Finnish proletariat is in a state of unrest and that there is evidence that imperialist Western nations are going to use Finland to invade the USSR. When the Finnish delegation get home to Helsinki, they find they are now the subjects of vicious attacks in the Soviet press. Still, they submit their report. In its final report to the government, the Moscow delegation stated that there were three actions the Russians might take. They might do as Erkko suggested and simply abandon their claims. They might actually declare war, or they might do nothing and just wait for the international situation to move in one direction or another. The first possibility seemed too good to be true. The second, too terrible to contemplate. Therefore, most people plumped for the third. People do want to believe in a positive outcome, though option 2 is looking more and more possible in Moscow. And as for the idea of peace or keeping peace in general, there will be no Nobel Peace Prize awarded this year. But it may interest you to know that one of those nominated for the award here in 1939 was Adolf Hitler. He was nominated a few months before the war began by Erik Brandt, a member of the Swedish parliament. This, predictably, generated outrage and condemnation of Brandt. It is true that in his letter to the Nobel Committee, Brandt calls Mein Kampf the best and most popular piece of literature in the world and calls Hitler the Prince of Peace on Earth. But it is also true that this was not intended as serious. Brandt was trying to be ironic. He is an anti-fascist who wanted to provoke Hitler and the Nazis. Had Hitler actually won the award, though, he would have had to break his own rules to accept it. In 1935, he had banned all Germans from receiving it because it had gone to Karl von Ossietzky, one of his outspoken critics. Ossietzky had actually been convicted of espionage in 1931 after exposing Germany breaking the Treaty of Versailles by both rebuilding an air force and training pilots for it in the Soviet Union. He served 18 months in prison, but in 1933 was arrested again after the Reichstag fire, after Hitler came to power, and spent the rest of his life in concentration camps until he contracted tuberculosis and died in hospital in police custody last year. His Nobel Prize was actually quite controversial, since many in Norway saw him as a criminal who had attacked his country without respecting its laws. And some laws are especially relevant this month. Laws of nature, specifically magnetism. On the 14th, Winston Churchill informs the British War Cabinet about a grave menace which well might be Hitler's secret weapon, which happens to be magnetic mine. These are not, as you may think, mines that attach to ships magnetically. These mines are not floating mines that require contact or can be swept away with nets. These lie on the bottom of the sea and work with the Earth's magnetic field. A large ferrous object, a ship passing overhead, even dozens of meters above, distorts the Earth's magnetic field enough to trigger the mine, which has an adjustable sensitivity. The British literally don't know what's hitting them. In November, the German U-boat campaign sinks 21 ships for 51,000 tons. More than twice that is sunk by mines. It's interesting how they work in general. You have a clockwork motor that's prevented from operation by a spring-loaded fuse. When this mine is dropped, say from a plane, and lands on the bottom of the sea, this fuse is blown. The motor then starts and slowly adjusts an internal magnet until that magnet's needle trips and blows a second fuse, right? This causes the adjustment to go back, which starts another clockwork that resets the mine. But now, the next time it's triggered, the mine will blow. The Germans had been working on magnetic influence mines since 1923, and in 1925 developed their first trigger, a dip needle unit. It works similar to a compass. Magnetic fluctuations attract one end of the needle, the other end touches a detonator, and boom. The early ones are a bit more simple than what I just described a minute ago. Seawater passing through valves pushes the primer around the detonator and also starts a short clock that, after winding down, connects the battery to the trigger, arming it. British interwar research was mainly focused on induction, not influence. Even during World War I, they used magnetic induction to detect underwater ships. A submarine passes across an undersea cable, the sub's magnetic field induces a current, you know something's down there. And there was more news this week back on the surface. On the 17th, the Allied Supreme War Council meets in Paris and endorses French commander Maurice Gamelon's Plan D. This plan, also called the Delay Plan, is to defeat a German attack on France through Belgium, ideally halting the enemy on the line of the River Delay in central Belgium. Some officers do have doubts that the French could arrive at the river before the Germans. And in other planning-related news on the other side of the world, after their victory over the Japanese at Changsha early last month, the Chinese nationalist military got a big morale boost and has been planning to go on the attack with a series of offensives across the entire country. They would use coordinated attacks by 80 total divisions to retake Japanese-occupied territory. But a real spanner was now thrown into these plans, for the Japanese surprised the nationalists and Chiang Kai-Shek, their leader, by launching an invasion of south-central Guangxi on the 15th. And in European-occupied territory, November 11th is Polish Independence Day. The Germans take 350 Poles from a labor camp near Gdynia to the town of Wejherowo. They order them to dig pits. Then the Poles are divided into groups, and each group is successively marched to the edge of the pits and shot while the others are forced to watch. The Poles cry out, "Long live Poland," as this happens. And the expulsion of Poles and Jews from the parts of Poland that Germany had annexed is moving right along. Albert Forster has this to say: "I have been appointed by the Führer as a trustee of the German cause in this country, with the express order to Germanize it afresh. It will therefore be my task to do everything possible to remove every manifestation of Polonism within the next few years, no matter what the kind." And the week ends with the Soviet press ever more anti-Finn and Stalin ever more pro-war. The French approving battle plans and the Chinese forced to delay their own, and a German secret weapon wreaking havoc on Allied shipping. And make no mistake, this is a serious threat. You can't just sweep them away. Heck, the British don't even know what they are, let alone how to combat them. But they better figure it out quick, because as things stand now, They have the power to destroy enough shipping to isolate Britain. And an isolated Britain is a defeated Britain. And Britain truly depends on its foreign colonial trade networks to live, a network they partly secured in the Middle East in the early 1920s. You can see more of that here in our episode about the division of the Middle East from between two wars. And please support our war effort by joining the TimeGhost army at Patreon or directly at timeghost.tv. See you next time.